The shovel bit deep into the hard Montana earth, each strike echoing across the empty prairie like a death knell. Jake Morrison wiped the sweat from his weathered brow and looked down at the rectangular hole he'd been digging since dawn. 6 feet long, 3 feet wide, 6 feet deep. Just right for a man who'd given up on everything that mattered. The sun hung low in the October sky, painting the grasslands the color of dried blood. It seemed fitting somehow. Jake had been bleeding inside for 3 years now, ever since the fever took his wife Sarah and their unborn child. Ever since he'd failed them both when they needed him most. He threw down the shovel and climbed out of the grave, his 40-year-old body protesting every movement. The whiskey bottle on the fence post caught the dying light, half empty like everything else in his life. He'd made his peace with the world, written his letters, and set his affairs in order. Tonight, when the stars came out, he joined Sarah under the endless Montana sky. But then he heard a sound that didn't belong to the prairie wind or the distant cattle. A woman's voice, weak and desperate, calling from somewhere near his gate. Jake's head snapped up, his hand instinctively moving to the Colt at his hip. Nobody came to the Morrison ranch anymore. He'd made sure of that, driving away well-meaning neighbors and concerned friends with his bitter tongue and hostile stare. The world had forgotten about Jake Morrison. And that's exactly how he wanted it. The voice came again, closer now, followed by the sound of something heavy hitting the ground against his better judgment. Jake found himself walking toward the front gate, his boots crunching on the dry grass. What he saw there made him forget all about the grave he'd dug for himself. A young woman lay crumpled beside his gate, her dark hair spilled across the dirt like spilled ink. She couldn't have been more than 20, and even in the fading light, Jake could see the unmistakable curve of her belly beneath her torn dress. She was heavy with child, maybe 7 or 8 months along. "Please," she whispered, her green eyes fluttering open as Jake knelt beside her. "Please help me. They're coming." Jake looked back down the dusty road that led to his ranch, seeing nothing but empty prairie. "What?" But something in the girl's voice, something in the terror that flickered across her delicate features, made him believe her. Without another word, he scooped her up in his arms, surprised by how light she felt despite her condition. She was burning with fever, her skin pale as moonlight. Jake carried her into the house he'd shared with Sarah, laying her gently on the bed where his wife had died 3 years ago. For a moment, the memories threatened to overwhelm him. Sarah's face in those final moments, the way she'd reached for him as the fever consumed her. But this girl needed him now. And something deep inside Jake's chest, something he thought had died with Sarah, stirred to life. "What's your name?" he asked, dampening a cloth with cool water from the pitcher on the nightstand. "Emma," she whispered, her eyes darting toward the window. "Emma Sullivan. They'll kill me if they find me here. They'll kill us both." Jake pressed the cool cloth to her forehead, and she sighed with relief. "Who's after you, Emma?" "The Blackwood brothers." The name came out like a curse. I was married to Thomas Blackwood, but he's not the father." Her hand moved protectively to her belly. "The baby belongs to someone else, someone they drove away. When Thomas found out, he said he'd rather see me dead than raise another man's bastard." Jake's jaw tightened. He'd heard of the Blackwood brothers, ruthless cattle barons who ruled the territory north of his land with an iron fist. They were known for taking what they wanted and destroying anyone who stood in their way. "You're safe here," Jake said. Though he wasn't sure he believed it himself. Blackwoods had money, guns, and men. What did he have? A half-empty whiskey bottle and a grave he'd dug for himself? Emma's fever broke sometime after midnight. Jake had dozed in the chair beside the bed, jerking awake when she called out in her sleep. She was dreaming, her face twisted with anguish as she spoke a name he couldn't quite catch. "Daniel," she whispered, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Daniel, come back to me." Jake felt something twist in his chest. This Daniel, whoever he was the father of her child. The man the Blackwoods had driven away, the man she loved. Over the next 3 days, as Emma regained her strength, Jake learned her story in pieces. She'd been barely 18 when her father, drowning in gambling debts, had sold her to Thomas Blackwood like a prize heifer. The marriage had been a business arrangement, nothing more. But then she'd met Daniel Connor, a young schoolteacher who'd come to the territory with dreams of building something good and decent. Their love had been swift and fierce, burning bright against the harsh frontier landscape like a candle in a storm. "We were going to run away together," Emma told Jake as she sat by the window, her hand resting on her swollen belly. Daniel had saved enough money for train tickets to California. "We were going to leave after the harvest, start a new life where nobody knew us." "What happened?" Jake asked, though he suspected he already knew. "Thomas found out. He sent his brothers to find Daniel, said they were going to teach him a lesson about taking another man's wife." Emma's voice broke. "They found him at the schoolhouse, beat him so badly he barely lived. Then they put him on a train east and told him if he ever came back, they'd finish what they started." Jake felt a familiar rage building in his chest, the same anger that had consumed him after Sarah's death. But this time, it wasn't directed inward. This time, he had someone to protect. "That was 4 months ago," Emma continued. "I found out I was carrying Daniel's child a month later. Thomas went crazy when I told him. Said he'd rather see me dead than disgraced. So I ran." "You did the right thing," Jake said, meaning it. Emma looked at him with those green eyes that seemed to see straight through to his soul. "You lost someone too, didn't you? I can see it in your face." Jake turned away, not trusting himself to speak. But somehow the words came anyway. "My wife, Sarah. The fever took her 3 years ago. She was pregnant too. Our first child." "I'm sorry," Emma said softly. "That's why you were digging the grave, isn't it? For yourself." Jake nodded, ashamed now of his planned surrender. "Seemed like the right thing to do at the time. Didn't see much point in going on without her, but you saved me instead." "Maybe you saved me?" They looked at each other across the small room, two broken souls finding unexpected solace in shared pain. Jake felt something shift inside him, a warmth he hadn't experienced since Sarah's death. Not love, it was too soon for that, and his heart still belonged to his wife. But hope, maybe? Purpose? That evening, as Emma helped Jake prepare supper, she doubled over with a sharp cry. Water pooled at her feet and Jake's blood ran cold. The baby, Emma gasped. "It's coming." Jake had helped deliver calves and foals, but a human birth was something else entirely. Still, there was no doctor for 50 miles and Emma needed him. He boiled water, gathered clean linens, and tried to remember everything Sarah had told him about childbirth. During their brief pregnancy, the labor lasted through the night and into the next day. Emma was strong, stronger than Jake had expected. But the baby was determined to come into the world on its own terms. As the sun reached its peak, Emma gave one final mighty push, and suddenly Jake was holding a tiny, squalling infant. "A boy," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You have a son, Emma." Emma's face shone with joy and exhaustion as Jake placed the baby in her arms. The infant had his mother's dark hair, but his father's strong jaw. Daniel's son, born free under the Montana sky. "What will you name him?" Jake asked. "James," Emma said without hesitation. "James Daniel Sullivan. After his father and the man who saved us both." Jake felt tears sting his eyes, turned away, overwhelmed by emotions he'd thought were buried with Sarah. When he looked back, Emma was studying him with those piercing green eyes. "You don't have to be alone anymore, Jake Morrison," she said quietly. "Neither of us do." But their peace was shattered 3 days later when Jake spotted dust clouds on the horizon. Riders, at least a dozen of them, heading straight for the ranch. "They found me," Emma whispered, clutching baby James to her chest. Jake checked his rifle and pistol, knowing it wouldn't be enough. The Blackwoods had come in force, and they weren't the type to be discouraged by one man's defiance. "Take the baby and hide in the root cellar," Jake ordered. "No matter what happens, don't come out until they're gone." "Jake." "No, they'll kill you." "Maybe, but they won't hurt you or the baby, I promise you that." The riders thundered into the yard just as Jake stepped onto his front porch. Thomas Blackwood rode at their head, a thin, cruel-faced man with eyes like chips of flint. His brothers flanked him, Marcus and Samuel, both cut from the same ruthless cloth. Morrison, Thomas called out, his voice dripping with false politeness. I believe you have something that belongs to me. Don't see how that's possible, Jake replied, his hand resting casually on his gun belt. Everything on this ranch belongs to me. Thomas laughed, but there was no humor in it. My wife, Morrison. The whore ran off with my child, and word is, she's been seen in these parts. Your wife? Jake stepped down from the porch, moving closer to the mounted men. Funny thing about wives, Blackwood, they tend to run from men who treat them poorly. The rancher's face darkened. That's my business, not yours.
Right.
Where is she? Even if I knew, I wouldn't tell you. A man who'd hunt down a pregnant woman like a wild animal doesn't deserve to call himself a husband. Samuel Blackwood's hand moved. To his gun? You got a mouth on you, Morrison. Maybe we should shut it permanent-like. Try it, Jake said quietly. See what happens. For a long moment, the two groups faced each other in tense silence. Jake knew he was outgunned, but he also knew these men. They were bullies and cowards who preyed on the weak. Stand up to them. And sometimes they'd back down. But Thomas Blackwood was desperate now, his pride wounded by his wife's flight. Search the house, he ordered his men. The hell you will. Jake's Colt appeared in his hand with smooth precision, the barrel aimed directly at Thomas's chest. This is my land, and you're not welcome on it. You can't fight us all, Morrison, Marcus Blackwood said, his own gun half drawn. Maybe not, but I guarantee you, your brother dies first. Then you. The question is, which one of you wants to be third? Jake saw the uncertainty flicker across their faces. They'd expected an easy target, not a man willing to die for his principles. This isn't over, Thomas snarled, but he wheeled his horse around. We know she's here, Morrison, and we'll be back. The Blackwoods rode away in a cloud of dust and curses, but Jake knew it was only a temporary reprieve. They'd return with more men, maybe even involve the territorial marshal. Money talked in these parts, and the Blackwoods had plenty of it. Emma emerged from the root cellar as soon as the riders disappeared, baby James crying in her arms. They'll be back, she said, echoing Jake's thoughts. Yes, which means you need. To leave I won't run again, Emma said firmly. I'm tired of running. Then what do you propose we do? I can't fight them all, Emma, and they won't give up. Not as long as you're here. Emma looked at him for a long moment, then walked to the window where she could see the grave Jake had dug for himself. It remained unfilled, a dark scar in the prairie grass. What if I wasn't Emma Blackwood anymore? She said quietly. Jake frowned. What do you mean? What if Emma Blackwood died in that grave? What if I became someone else entirely? Understanding dawned slowly. Emma, you can't be serious. Why not? Emma Sullivan was sold to Thomas Blackwood against her will. That woman died when she ran away. The woman standing here now, the mother of James, Daniel Sullivan, she's someone new, someone free. It's not that simple. Legal papers, records, legal papers written by men who think they can own women like cattle. Emma's voice grew stronger. This is the frontier, Jake. People reinvent themselves out here all the time. Outlaws become lawmen, failures become successes. Why can't a runaway wife become a free woman?
Oh.
Jake stared at her, seeing not the frightened girl who'd collapsed at his gate, but a woman transformed by motherhood and hardship into something formidable. Even if it worked, where would you go? How would you live? Emma walked to him, baby James sleeping peacefully in her arms. I'd stay here if you'd have us, Emma. ... I know you still love your wife. I'm not asking you to forget Sarah or replace her with me. But this ranch needs a woman's touch, and James needs a father. You saved our lives, Jake Morrison. Let us save yours in return. Jake looked at this remarkable woman who'd stumbled into his life just as he was ready to end it. 3 weeks ago, he'd been digging his own grave. Now he was contemplating a future he'd never imagined. What about Daniel? He asked quietly. The man you love. Pain flickered across Emma's face, but her voice remained steady. Daniel's gone. The Blackwoods made sure of that. Even if he came back, they'd kill him. I won't be responsible for his death. But you love him. Yes, I always will. Just like you'll always love Sarah, but love doesn't always mean possession, Jake. Sometimes it means letting go. That night, as Emma slept with baby James beside her, Jake sat on his porch and thought about the strange turns life could take. A month ago, he'd been planning his death. Now he was considering a proposal that would change everything. He thought about Sarah, about the dreams they'd shared and the future that had been stolen from them. Would she want him to spend the rest of his life mourning what might have been? Or would she want him to embrace whatever happiness he could find? The answer came to him with the dawn. Sarah had been the kindest, most generous woman he'd ever known. She would want him to live, to help others, to find purpose, even in grief. Jake made his decision. 3 days later, a small party gathered at the prairie grave Jake had dug for himself. Emma stood beside him, wearing Sarah's best dress, which fit her perfectly. Baby James slept in the arms of Mrs. Henderson, the preacher's wife, who'd ridden out from town for the ceremony. Dearly beloved Reverend Henderson began, his voice carrying across the empty grassland. We are gathered here today to witness the marriage of Jake Morrison and Emma Sullivan, and to lay to rest the woman who was. It was an unusual ceremony, part wedding and part funeral. They buried Emma Blackwood's torn dress in the grave Jake had intended for himself, symbolically putting to rest her old life of bondage and fear. Then they spoke their vows under the endless Montana sky, promising not passionate love, but partnership, protection, and mutual respect. Do you, Jake Morrison, take Emma Sullivan to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold, to protect and cherish, for as long as you both shall live? I do, Jake said, meaning it. Do you, Emma Sullivan, take Jake Morrison to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold, to stand beside and support for as long as you both shall live? I do, Emma replied, her voice clear and strong, as they exchanged simple gold bands. Jake felt something shift inside his chest, not the desperate passion he'd shared with Sarah, but something steadier and perhaps more valuable, a sense of partnership, of shared purpose in an uncertain world. The Blackwoods returned weeks later, but this time they found a different scene entirely. Jake stood on his porch with his arm around his lawfully wedded wife, their marriage certificate prominently displayed in the front window. Baby James played at their feet, gurgling happily in the morning sun. You're trespassing on private property, Jake called out as the riders approached. I suggest you turn around and ride back where you came from. Thomas Blackwood's face was purple with rage. That's my wife, Morrison. You can't just marry another man's wife. Your wife. Jake's voice was calm, reasonable, according to these legal documents. My wife is Emma Morrison, formerly Emma Sullivan. I've never heard of anyone named Emma Blackwood. You know damn well. I know that you're harassing law-abiding citizens on their own property. I also know that bigamy is a serious crime in this territory. A man can't be married to 2 women at once, Mr. Blackwood, the rancher sputtered, but Jake could see the uncertainty in his eyes. The legal ground was shakier now, and the Blackwoods were nothing if not careful about staying on the right side of territorial law. The child, Thomas said desperately. The bastard she's carrying belongs to me by law. Emma stepped forward, baby James in her arms. This is James Morrison, my husband's son, adopted legally and properly. If you have any documentation proving otherwise, I'd be happy to see it. Of course, Thomas had no such documentation. By his own admission, he'd claimed the child wasn't his. The adoption papers Jake had filed in town made James's legal son, with all the rights and protections that entailed. Frustrated and outmaneuvered, the Blackwoods had no choice but to retreat. They rode away that day and never returned, though Jake heard later that Thomas had divorced his deceased wife and married a banker's daughter from Helena. The seasons turned, and life at the Morrison Ranch settled into a comfortable rhythm. Emma proved to be everything Jake could have hoped for in a partner, strong, capable, and wise beyond her years. She tended the house and garden with the same care Sarah had shown, but in her own way, making the place feel alive again. Baby James grew into a sturdy, cheerful child who called Jake Papa and brought joy to every corner of the ranch. Jake taught him to ride and rope, just as he would have taught his own son. But it was the quiet moments that meant the most: evenings on the porch watching the sunset paint the prairie gold. The sound of Emma humming as she worked, the way she'd rest her hand on his shoulder when passing his chair. Not passion, perhaps, but something deeper and more enduring. They never spoke of love, Jake and Emma. They didn't need to. Love came in many forms, and theirs was built on gratitude, respect, and shared purpose. It was the love of two wounded souls who'd found healing in each other's company. 2 years passed before the letter came. Jake found Emma on the porch steps, a crumpled piece of paper in her hands and tears streaming down her face. Baby James, now a toddler, played nearby, oblivious to his mother's distress. "What is it?" Jake asked, though part of him already knew. "It's from Daniel," Emma whispered. "He's alive, Jake. He's in California, and he's been looking for me." "Shh." Jake's heart clenched, but he kept his voice steady. "What does he say?" Emma smoothed out the letter with shaking hands. "He says he's been writing letters for 2 years, sending them to anyone who might know where I am. This one found its way to Mrs. Henderson, and she thought I should see it." Jake sat down beside her, his mind racing. Does he know about James? No, the letter is from 6 months ago. He doesn't know anything that's happened since he left. They sat in silence for a long moment, watching their son play in the dirt. James had Jake's steady temperament, but Emma's green eyes, a perfect blend of the family they'd created. "What do you want to do?" Jake asked quietly. Emma looked at him, her eyes swimming with tears. "I don't know. I thought I'd made peace with losing him, but seeing his words again." "You still love him?" "Yes, but I love this too." She gestured to the ranch, to James, to the life they'd built together. "I love the family we've become, Jake. I don't want to lose that either." Jake felt his heart breaking and healing at the same time. He'd known this day might come, had even prepared for it in some ways. Emma had never hidden her feelings for Daniel, and Jake had never asked her to. If he came back, Jake said carefully, what would happen? "I don't know. The Blackwoods might still be a threat, and there's James to consider. He's your son now, legally and in every way that matters." "He's our son," Jake corrected gently. "All 3 of ours, if Daniel is willing." Emma stared at him. "You'd do that? You'd share him?" "Emma, you gave me back my life when I was ready to throw it away. You brought joy back to this house, purpose, back to my days. If Daniel Connor is half the man you believe him to be, then maybe there's room for all of us." That night, Emma wrote a letter of her own. She told Daniel everything about the Blackwoods, about Jake, about the new life she'd built, and the son who bore his name. She asked him to come, but only if he could accept the family they'd become. The reply came faster than expected. Daniel. Connor rode into the yard on a warm spring morning, 3 months after Emma had sent her letter. He was younger than Jake had expected, maybe 25, with the kind, intelligent eyes Emma had described. Jake met him at the gate, his hand resting on his gun, but his posture relaxed. "You must be Daniel. Jake Morrison, I presume." Daniel dismounted, his own hands visible and empty. "I want to thank you for taking care of Emma and my son." "Our son," Jake corrected, "and there's no need for thanks. I got as much from them as I gave." Daniel nodded, studying Jake's face. "Your letter. Emma said you'd be willing to share custody." "I have to admit I don't understand. Love isn't about ownership," Jake said, repeating words Emma had spoken long ago. "It's about doing what's best for the people you care about." Emma appeared on the porch then, James on her hip. The little boy had grown into a handsome child with his father's strong features and his mother's expressive eyes. Daniel's breath caught at the sight of them, double quotes, "Hello, Daniel," Emma said softly. "Emma." Daniel's voice was thick with emotion. "You're even more beautiful than I remembered." Walked down to them, James watching the stranger with curious eyes. "James, this is Daniel. He's your other papa." The child looked back and forth between the 2 men, then smiled. "2 papas. That's right," Jake said, ruffling the boy's hair. "You're the luckiest boy in Montana." What followed were the most difficult and most rewarding months of Jake's life. Daniel proved to be everything Emma had claimed, intelligent and devoted to his small family. He was also reasonable enough to understand that the situation required delicate handling. They worked out an arrangement that seemed impossible, but somehow functioned. Daniel built a small cabin on the far side of the ranch, close enough to be part of the family but far enough to give everyone space. He helped with the cattle and horses during the day, shared meals with them in the evening, and told stories to James before bedtime at first. Jake felt like an intruder in his own home. Daniel and Emma had a history, a connection forged by first love and shared dreams. But as the weeks passed, Jake began to see something unexpected developing. Rather than dividing the family, Daniel's presence seemed to strengthen it. Emma bloomed like a flower in spring, her joy infectious and complete. But she never forgot Jake's role in their lives, never let him feel excluded or unimportant. He was careful to show affection to both men, to make it clear that their unusual family was built on love, not competition. And Daniel, for his part, treated Jake not as a rival, but as a brother. He recognized the debt he owed the older man and never tired of expressing his gratitude. More than that, he seemed to genuinely like and respect Jake, seeking his advice and valuing his opinions. "I don't understand how this works of visiting," Preacher said one day. Watching Daniel and Jake work together to repair a fence while Emma and James picked vegetables in the garden, "It's not ... natural." "What's natural?" Jake replied, hammering a nail into a fence post. "Is it natural for a woman to be sold like livestock? Is it natural for love to be beaten out of a man? Is it natural for a child to grow up without knowing his father?" The preacher had no answer for that. By summer's end, their arrangement had evolved into something none of them had expected. Emma was clearly the heart of the family, the center around which they all revolved. But Jake and Daniel had become genuine friends, partners in both ranch work and child-rearing. James thrived with two fathers, learning different lessons from each. Jake taught him practical skills: riding, roping, shooting, books and numbers, opening the child's mind to worlds beyond the prairie. Together, they gave him something precious, a sense of security and belonging that no conventional family could have provided. The question of marriage never arose. Emma was legally Jake's wife, and that seemed to suit everyone. Daniel had never cared much for conventional society anyway, and Jake found that he valued their friendship too much to complicate it with jealousy. But there were moments, quiet evenings when Emma would sit between them on the porch, or mornings when all four of them would work together in the garden, when Jake felt a completeness he'd never imagined possible. Not the passionate love he'd shared with Sarah, but something broader and deeper. Family, in the truest sense of the word. 5 years passed before they faced their next crisis. Thomas Blackwood was dead, killed in a gambling dispute in Denver. But his brothers had long memories and patient hearts. They'd spent years building a case against Jake and Emma, gathering evidence and buying influence. The territorial marshal arrived on a cold October morning with a warrant for Emma's arrest. Bigamy, they claimed. Fraud, theft of property, meaning James. "This is ridiculous," Daniel said, his usually calm demeanor cracking. "Emma was never legally married to Thomas Blackwood. She was sold to him against her will." "That's not what these documents say," the marshal replied, unfolding official-looking papers. "According to this marriage certificate, Thomas Blackwood and Emma Sullivan were legally wed in 1875. That makes her subsequent marriage to Mr. Morrison invalid." Jake studied the documents, his heart sinking.
Ow.
They looked authentic, but he suspected they'd been backdated and falsified.
Ow.
The Blackwoods had money and connections. Manufacturing evidence wouldn't be difficult for them. "Even if that were true," Emma said, her voice steady despite her fear, "Thomas is dead. A dead man can't claim a living wife." "No, but his estate can claim damages. Alienation of affections, theft of property, fraud. The penalties are severe, ma'am." That night, as Emma packed a small bag for the journey to Helena, where she'd await trial, the family held a council of war. "I won't let them take you," Daniel said, pacing the small parlor like a caged wolf. "We'll run. All of us. Go to California. Start over. Running won't solve anything, Jake replied.
Oh.
They'll follow us, and next time, we might not see them coming. Then, what do you suggest? Emma asked. Jake was quiet for a long moment, thinking. Then he stood and walked to the desk where he kept important papers. I have an idea, but you're not going to like it. He pulled out a document he'd hoped never to use, a confession he'd written years ago, detailing his role in helping Emma escape from her husband. It painted him as the mastermind, the man who'd corrupted an innocent woman and stolen her away. Jake. No, Emma said, understanding immediately. I won't let you sacrifice yourself for me. It's not a sacrifice, it's a choice. Jake's voice was calm, resolved. They want someone to blame for this mess. Let them blame me. Future, you three have your whole lives ahead of you. You're not old, James piped up from his corner, where he'd been pretending to read. At 7, he was old enough to understand that his family was in danger, and you're my papa. Won't let them take you either. Jake knelt beside his son, his heart swelling with pride and love. Sometimes, James, being a man means making hard choices to protect the people you love. Do you understand? The boy nodded solemnly. Like when you fought off those wolves to save the cattle? Exactly like that. But Emma was shaking her head. There has to be another way. We're a family, Jake. We face this together, or not at all. Daniel cleared his throat. Actually, there might be another option. They all turned to look at him. The young man's face was pale but determined. What if Emma Blackwood really was dead? He said quietly. What if she died years ago and the woman living here was someone entirely different? We tried that already, Jake said. It didn't work. No, you tried to hide Emma. I'm talking about replacing her. The room fell silent as the implications sank, and Daniel was suggesting something far more drastic than a simple name change. My sister Mary, Daniel continued. She died of fever in California 2 years ago. She was about Emma's age, similar build. Her husband moved east after she passed, left no forwarding address. Daniel, that's